Today we're looking at European imperialism in the modern era, and this is one of our big picture events, one of our key events of the whole modern era. When we look at our big events of this era, it's the political revolutions like the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and all of the Latin American revolutions. It's the Industrial Revolution, and then European imperialism. So those are our key events of the overall modern era, our big picture events. European imperialism, when we talk about imperialism, first off, imperialism is simply the domination of one nation over a weaker nation. And there are various types of imperialism. So you can have political imperialism, where a country goes in and they physically take over and they rule the new territory. But you can also have economic imperialism, where I don't physically control another country, but I'm going to control the trade and I'm going to control the economy of another country. You can also have what we call a protectorate, where one country acts as kind of a big brother to another country. And maybe I just send my military in to keep order and stability in that nation. So we're going to start by looking at the causes, the motives for European imperialism. And so the biggest motive for European imperialism in the modern era was wealth and various forms of wealth. So there was a goal to make personal fortunes, but the driving factor behind these economic motives was really the desire to find raw materials and find new markets to sell products in. And this is all a direct effect of European industrialization. As European countries industrialized, well, they needed raw materials to feed their factories, and they wanted to find new markets to sell their finished products in. And so economic motives were really the major drive that encouraged European imperialism. Another motive was political motives. And so here we're talking about gaining new territory for strategic purposes, needing harbors to trade, needing supply stations to refuel ships and things like that. Also, competition played a role here. Competition with other European countries and trying to keep that balance of power. And as this competition grew between European countries for territory, that's also going to help inspire things like nationalism and patriotism as well. And then there were also cultural justifications. And so what we're talking about here is, first off, the desire to spread Christianity. And again, some nations were more into spreading Christianity than others. Spain was one of the countries that really worked hard to spread Christianity. For the most part, Britain was less interested in spreading Christianity, but there were Christian missionaries that went to parts of Africa and Asia, helping to spread the faith. Also, another cultural justification was the idea of the civilizing mission, or the white man's burden, or social Darwinism. And with those three terms, we're basically talking about the same idea. And that's that the Europeans saw themselves as superior to these peoples they were dominating. And the idea was that the Europeans had a right to dominate these other peoples because they were superior. And also the idea that they were helping to spread civilization to these lesser peoples. So the tools that enabled imperialism, first off, new transportation technologies. And again, this is going back to the Industrial Revolution, but especially steam-powered ships and the spread of railroads. The combination of both steam-powered ships and new canals made transportation much faster. For example, the Suez Canal made it much faster to travel from Europe to Asia. And so whereas before, in order to go around Africa, if you were trying to administer a territory in India, it could take upwards of a couple years to send a message from the European home country to India, get a response back, and then send your reply. Well, now with the combination of the Suez Canal and these steamships, I could send a message to India and receive a response back within a couple of weeks. And so that made it much easier to oversee these colonies. Railroads played a huge role. Railroads help move armies around, also help get the raw materials out of these countries. Also, superior military technologies play a huge role. Superior firearms, especially with the development of the machine gun. The Maxim gun was the first successful machine gun tested. It's going to give the Europeans a huge advantage over these native armies. And also, communication technologies are going to play a big role. Not just steamships, but later the telegraph is going to be invented. And so again, now it made it much easier for me to administer my overseas colonies. So when we look at the types of colonies that were established, there are really two key types. Most of what we see are going to be called, or what we call tropical dependencies. And in these tropical dependencies, you only had a small number of Europeans in those territories that oversaw a large native population. And then the other type of colonies that are going to be established are what we call settlement colonies. Settlement colonies are where we actually had large numbers of Europeans move and settle in those colonies. And so some examples of this are places like Algeria and Hawaii. And then you also have some more extreme examples, which we call our white dominions. White dominions are places like Australia and Canada, where a majority of the population are going to be Europeans, and they're going to push the native populations onto marginalized lands.